We'll begin our session with a group of regulators from around the West. So let's talk about collaboration. You've all been working together in some form or fashion, and on the original governance model that was created through the Transitional Committee, we invented the poorly named BOSR, Body of State Regulators. And the notion was, this is how we can involve and bring in the commissioners in the regulatory world into an environment around markets. We just were, it was new to all of us. And over time, I've seen quite an evolution with the BOSR. And let's talk about it. We have 2 former chairs and the current chair of the BOSR. And Commissioner Rendall is commissioner from the Washington Utilities and Transportation Commission. To the farthest is Commissioner Letha Tawney. She's from the Oregon Public Utilities Commission. And Chair Thad LeVar is from the Utah Public Service Commission. And immediately to my left is Commissioner Darcy Houck with the California Public Utilities Commission. So big chunk of the West represented here, and just a great group to work with. So Anne, tell us about the evolution of collaboration within the BOSR. How did it start and how's it going?
So thank you, Rekha, and it's good to see all of you today. So I would say the commissioners in the West have been working together for a long time, even before the BOSR, through the Western Interstate Energy Board and the Committee for Regional Electric Power Cooperation, a lot of discussions together in the West with other folks, including many of you. And so when the Transitional Committee was developing the governance model, there were a number of state regulators who were involved in that conversation. But the BOSR was something new. It was something more focused, really focused on learning about markets, because most of us outside of California really didn't know much about markets going into this. So it was an opportunity to, one commissioner from each state where there was a EIM entity engaged, got together. Somehow I ended up getting appointed as the chair initially. I think I blame former Commissioner Phil Jones for roping me into that, but it was a great experience. It was focused on education, like the charter that John Prescott mentioned for the governing body. We developed a charter to figure out how we were going to move forward in this space, focused on consensus, focused on collaboration, focused on education, because many of us really needed to learn about this new thing and how we were going to engage in it. And so about a year in, maybe not even a year into this effort, PacifiCorp decided to announced its intent to join CAISO, which kind of ramped up the governance discussion as well, and really helped us learn about how we work together. And I see former Commissioner Florio here, and former Commissioner Jones and Commissioner Florio really were leading us in an effort in that on governance, really an exercise in learning how to work with one another, appreciating our differences, understanding really where we all focus together on the importance of transparency, getting benefit for customers, and understanding the pros and cons of the different models. And so I would just say it really was a more focused collaborative effort than the Weeb-CREPC effort that is still going on, but really allows us to engage. We focused initially on Washington staff did a lot of the organizing early on. When I transitioned off as chair, and former Commissioner Jordan White from Utah took the helm of the BOSR, we knew we needed a different way of organizing. And so we leaned heavily on Weeb for providing staffing. And so that was sort of the initial part of it. And I'll leave it there because I know other folks have thoughts on that as well.
Commissioner Tawney, you served as a chair after Jordan, right? Tell us about where you picked up and where you left off, and your reflections on that time with the BOSR.
Well, thanks. And it's lovely to be here. And I want to appreciate the CAISO staff for organizing such an amazing event. I did have the privilege of picking up the chair after Commissioner White, and he had really taken the work. Commissioner Rendell is very humble. When she sees work that needs doing, she gets it done, and we all benefit from that hard labor. And Jordan had really taken the direction that she had set and deepened the understanding of commissioners on what are the functions they serve, how do they accomplish that, what does this look like in the rest of the country. And I picked up the reins and really saw that we had a growing sense that it was acceptable and even necessary that we all lean in and advocate for customers in this new role. So when this all began, there was, I think, a reticence about what is the role of commissioners. We don't typically think of ourselves as advocates. And yet in this venue, we really need to step up for our customers. And there was a growing understanding of that in the Bosser. We were also, I think, building a deeper understanding that we have much more in common than we have different. Every time we engage an issue, what we find is that we are all deeply concerned about affordability, reliability, and how we meet the state policies our legislatures and governors have handed us. And that is 100% common across all of the states in the West. We all care extraordinarily deeply about these issues. And that means, in fact, in the Bosser, every time we thought we would have conflict, we have more common cause than conflict. And building that sense of understanding of each other has really contributed to that. I saw my job as the chair in those years to be building the capacity to show up as advocates effectively, both effective for the stakeholder process, right, that we're putting forward solutions that are in the public interest, but also effective for us who have day jobs and have little tiny staffs and really have complicated issues at home, but really want to play an important role here too. And so we focused on how to staff, how to deepen the training, and that all required funding. And so it was really exciting at the end of the first phase of the GRC to have put in place a long-term stream of funding for the Bosser, just like a grown-up RTO has. And that has paid dividends. So WEEB, which is a real asset to the Western states, it's an interstate compact focused on energy in the West. No other region has an interstate compact like that to lean into. We lean into them to provide independent, unbiased staffing support. Worry Lee is here, which is fantastic. We would be completely bereft without that staff. Bonnie is also here somewhere. I haven't had a chance to say hello yet. And that capacity lets us show up in a much more constructive and effective way for all of you so that you can hear how the states are perceiving the evolution of the market. I was really pleased to hand the reins to Chair LeVar after I had served for 2 years, midway in the pandemic. So he had a heavy lift on his hands, and I'll leave it there. But all of this gives me real confidence for how we can solve hard problems going forward, given how much we've built in the intervening years.
So Chair LeVar, we've had the setup, and now you are leading the Bosser, and I've made an effort this year to participate or listen into your meetings more regularly, and really impressed with how deep you all are going in subject, both in terms of market design and governance. And I would be remiss in saying I thank you all for your comments to the Governance Review Committee. Very, very helpful and foundational. Obviously, I lean towards commissions and those perspectives, and you all have given us really good things to work from. So, Chair LeVar, want to share your thoughts on how things are going and your experience with the Bosser?
Thank you. Because of the work that Commissioner Rendall and Commissioner Tani just described, stepping into the position of chair about a little over a year ago was a lot easier than it was for either of them when they did. But I do remember those first days. I was a member of the BOSSER when it was first organized. I stepped off for a few years. And I can remember those first meetings. Commissioner Rendall was wondering how she got roped into being the first chair. I do remember being the one who nominated her for that. I'm not sure I should remind you, but I did. But in those days, some of the biggest challenges were, when are we going to meet? How are we going to find a room to meet in? And then when we didn't have physical meetings, it was which commission's turn is it to take hosting the bridge number for our next meeting? Logistical issues like that just kind of were a significant hurdle for us. But the biggest role at that point was educational. All of us were trying to figure out, what is this energy-only market? How is it different from the RTOs around the rest of the country? What does it mean in terms of our jurisdiction? Does it really mean anything in terms of our jurisdiction? There were a lot of unanswered questions. So the original days were all about education, and the meetings were just to inform us as things are going on. Now, as the work that Commissioner Rendall and Commissioner Tani described happened over the next few years, and as we were able to eventually obtain dedicated independent staffing through WEEB, we've been able to be an organization that isn't just for educating its own members, but also moving into advocacy. And as Commissioner Tani said, that's a different place for us to be as commissioners. We're usually on the receiving end of advocacy, not the giving end. And so it's an unusual place to be. Most of the substantive work that the BOSSER does, the most important work we do, is outside of our meetings. So when we prepare comments to provide to the governing body, to give advice or positions, the work on that is done outside of our meetings. The staff from WEEB who provide support to us, they give us public briefings, but then they provide drafts and potential comments for us to consider. And so we do most of that work, primarily through email and through informal discussions. That work is possible, though, because of the relationships that we build in our meetings and the in-person meetings and virtual. We've been able to build trust and collaboration so that we can work through sometimes challenging issues. We try to operate primarily as a consensus organization. Most of our comments are consensus. We had one incident recently with the resource efficiency evaluation test where we didn't have a consensus on the proper consequences for failure to meet that test. There's a lot of people in this room who have differences of opinion on that issue, but we also couldn't get to a consensus. But because of the collaboration and the trust that we have among the group, we were able to deal with that difference of opinion in a very congenial way. It was just a matter of fact. We had to prepare our comments in a way that reflected non-unanimity, but it didn't have any impact on the trust we have for each other and on the collaborative nature of the work. And that, I think, is a testament to all the years of work that have happened from those early days of what in the world are we doing to finding ways to really work through substantive issues. And we do have to pick and choose what issues to weigh in on. And that comes from our day jobs too. In our day jobs at our commission, we don't always weigh in on every issue, and we have to decide when to step forward as regulators taking the lead and when to step back and let other stakeholders or industry representatives take the lead. And I think we're finding our groove with the BOSSER too of when to comment on issues and which issues are more appropriate for us to educate ourselves on but not necessarily comment on. And I think everyone knows which issues we do and don't comment on, but I think that wraps up my comments at this point. Thank you.
Thanks, Thad. Darcy, you're not a former chair of the BOSSER, but you are BOSSER adjacent. Any reflections or comments on what you've heard or what you have seen through the work of the BOSSER?
Sure, thank you. And I wanted to thank CAISO for putting on the symposium. As a commissioner, 90% of my meetings have been on a WebEx screen, so it's really great to see so many people here and in person and actually get to meet people that I've only seen virtually. So I just wanted to thank CAISO for this opportunity to be on the panel. And as you said, I'm not technically serving on BOSSER, but over the last year or so, I've been much more involved, working closely with Commissioner Rechtschaffen, who's our representative, working with the GHG MOU states group, and many of the folks on that group are sitting on Bosser, and I've been included in a lot of those discussions. And from what I've seen, and in my opinion, I think it's been a very effective organization to provide a forum to build trust among commissioners across the West, to vet critical and important issues, to look at how we're going to advocate and address the priorities that I think we have more in common than we do apart, as Commissioner Tawny indicated: affordability, reliability, and meeting our legislative mandates and the clean energy goals that we have across the West. And I think that this is a great forum to build that trust and to look at how we're going to move forward across the West and make sure we've got a grid that's going to meet the needs for those priorities as we move into the next decade. I also just want to comment that I think the consensus process is important and has been very effective. It's allowed for the Bosser to file comments, as was mentioned before, and I think those comments carry weight with FERC, with CAISO, when they see that West-wide commissioners are in agreement on so many issues and are looking for common solutions to ensure that we do have affordability, reliability, and meet our clean energy mandates.
Thank you, Commissioner. Looking ahead for the Bosser, there's a lot going on right now, and this will help us. We'll transition into our next segment. But any forecasts specific to the Bosser of how it will continue to evolve, and anything that's jumping out at you that you see it's on the horizon that the Bosser will be beginning to engage or will need to engage in?
So my crystal ball is very full. There's a lot, I think I tap into the work that we do on the Bosser is our extracurricular activity. The work, our day jobs keep us pretty busy, and tapping into these issues are really critical. Not many of us have substantial staff that are focused on these issues. And so I think looking forward, there has been so much work on governance, both with the Bosser, starting with the Transitional Committee, with the Governance Review Committee, Part 1 and Part 2, or maybe we're on Part 3, I don't remember. But a lot, that governance conversation that has progressed and the work with the Regional Issues Forum, we are still finding our way, although I think we've established a really good baseline and a set of sort of principles on how we move forward, no matter what the future brings. And so I think with EDAM, the Bosser will continue to operate much the way it is, but if things develop further, then we're going to have to look differently at and more formally at what the role of the states is. And I think we've all been learning about this evolution of process since the very beginning. Again, since PacifiCorp announced its intent to join CAISO, that really spurred the focus on sort of what is that more formal collaboration, more formal organization that would be a formal states committee. And while we didn't reach that point, we flexed those muscles, we've learned, and while commissioners come and go, 8 years is a long time in the life of a commissioner. I think even the newer commissioners joining, we have built the structure for folks to join and understand what we do and the importance of engaging on these issues with the governing body, with the Board of Governors, with the Regional Issues Forum, with all of the folks that are engaged and interested in the market. So I guess I'll leave it there.
Thanks, Anne. Anybody else want to make a forecast?
I think that when I look at other states committees across the country, they go deep on issues that impact reliability and cost for customers. And I anticipate that as we build our capacity, that's what the Bosser will do. And that we will, over time, have more and more staff tuned in and attending to these issues alongside and in concert with the Bosser staff that we have, because that's the natural evolution. You begin to understand that these decisions, these market design decisions, these compensation decisions, these price formation decisions end up at home setting or impacting the opportunity to reduce costs for customers. And so you move to the forum where you need to move in order to address customer issues. And so I continue to expect that maturation as we go forward.
Thank you. Thad, Darcy, anything want to jump in?
Well, as I think about how things have changed in the, I'll say, almost a decade since the WEIM began, those early educational sessions were a lot about commissioners trying to understand, does this really impact our jurisdiction, our responsibility to ensure that the customers in our state are receiving service at just and reasonable rates reliably? It took some time for us to get to that point, and at least I can say I have a fairly high confidence level that the WEIM has not impacted that jurisdiction at all. The utility we regulate still is responsible to prudently manage its power costs. The WEIM is one of the ways it does that, and we have dockets every year where we evaluate how they're prudently managing those costs, but this is one piece of that puzzle. And I think I'm fairly confident in saying the members of the Bossers generally have that same understanding, that the WEIM is not impacting our jurisdiction. I personally have a high level of confidence that that's also going to be the case for a day-ahead, extended day-ahead market, that it's simply one of the tools that the utilities could use to manage their power costs and also to manage their decarbonization goals. And it doesn't impact our role as regulators. But the time we've spent working through these issues are a good foundation for what most stakeholders hope comes next after the extended day-ahead market becomes successful, is working towards something else, which might be a full RTO. And that is an issue that does impact commission jurisdictions, and that does start to draw some lines on state jurisdiction versus federal jurisdiction. And we're a lot more prepared to deal with those issues when we get to them, when the time is right, because of the almost a decade we've spent working through the WEIM Bosser.
And thank you for raising that, because I recall early on with the transitional committee and just trying to navigate what is governance, what is it going to look like, and doing some myth busting, and a lot of the fears that were coming up was states not having their authority, their general authority would be impinged somehow by EIM. And through experience and practice, that has not been the case. And I'm happy to hear that, because that was one of those fear factors that we heard and tried to address. But proof is in the pudding, and I'm happy to hear that has not been happening, and that you all are becoming more comfortable with those dynamics of, you have a market that is enhancing, I would say, the efficiency of the utility and bringing benefit to the customers that you luckily get to represent. Darcy, any thoughts on that?
I agree with my colleagues here that to the extent, we're looking at EDAM, it sounds like Bosser can continue to function fairly similar to how it is now, but at the same time, I think there's a foundation that's been laid to be looking at what those next steps are. But as was mentioned on the panel earlier and by my colleagues, we're going to relook at what that means and how that's going to work in conjunction with state regulatory authority, and how we move to expand whatever the benefits that we may see from a West-wide grid. But I think there's a good foundation here that's been built through Bosser.
So turning to, as we're looking to the future, earlier this year, commissioners from around the West put together a group of principles. I think there's about 10 principles that range on the different key components of governance. And it wasn't specific to any one thing, but just these general guiding principles that is really helpful for me and the work that I do, because it telegraphs what commissioners want. And commissioners are ultimately going to be deciders on so much of the future with EDAM and also our future RTO. And I would love to hear a little bit more about how did you get to that point? They're really good principles. I think they're foundational and informative, but there's a lot of names, a lot of commissions signed on, and I'd love to hear the backstory on that. How did you get there, and how do you see it as a tool for the future?
Well, I'll take that. Let me start with just clearly there's more and more momentum, pressure, depending on which side of the equation you're on, towards regionalization, driven by the energy mix, if nothing else. And more and more impatience, I think, in some quarters to get there because of the potential benefits for customers. And that's not universal, but definitely a factor. And let's reflect, the status quo means reliability or prices at market hubs all happen with very little avenue for us to collaborate together, think through how to protect customers outside of our little tiny islands. We sort of regulate as though we are each on our little island, and we know that's less and less effective. So we built some muscles, built some personal relationships with the bosser. And when the Western Power Pool began to talk about a regional RA program, recognized that we would need, right, Western RA is going to have a really direct impact on procurement of resources, on integrated resource planning, how things are judged. It's going to have a very direct impact on how RFPs play out. And if states were going to have a voice in that, then we needed to figure out how to engage. The Western Power Pool was very gracious about reaching out, but we leaned on our bosser muscles to create an ad hoc process with WEAB to stand up the equally poorly named CAISO. We're not an inventive crowd. And that was a really successful set of conversations, again, across the whole West, but ad hoc, very much just on the phone. What do you think about this? Here's why the RAP program is going to be important for your state. Now let's talk about how we want to show up. Coming out of that and seeing the scale of conversation around Markets Plus with SPP, lots of wondering about what WEMEG might lead to in terms of different RTO options. I think there was a moment to try to telegraph to the West, here's what we as state regulators have learned about what good governance in the West looks like. We've learned a lot. We've been working really hard together. And this is what we want to see in an institution so that the public interest and customers are first and foremost in the decision making, so that there is good transparency. So we can start with the FERC principles, but let's elaborate a little bit more on what something for the West should look like. And building on all of the hard work and learning over the last 8-10 years, can we take this moment to say, hey, if you're building an institution, here's how we want to be at the table, and here's what we think you need to have in order to protect customers effectively. And we want to have a really even hand. If we're going to ask the CAISO to do something, are we asking all of the other institutions to do the same, or are we playing favorites somehow? If we're asking SPP to do something, are we asking the CAISO to step up in the same way? Are we being very even-handed? Because if it's good for customers, then it should be in the institution, regardless of who houses that institution in the end. So we drafted them, we worked them over, we worked on consensus, again, an ad hoc process. But in the end, everyone was comfortable with the principles. We all have different processes for signing on. This is part of the challenge of doing ad hoc work. We all care about affordability, reliability, and meeting state policy, but we each have a different public meeting process. And so Chair LeVar and Utah were not able to sign on, but they were part of the consultation. And I was really pleased that colleagues from absolutely across the West were willing to engage and think through what is our ask to the region to protect customers as we think about regionalization, since we're going to do it in this uniquely Western way. We're not going to take an Eastern RTO, that's clear. And so how are we going to do this?
Thanks, Commissioner. And let's go down the line. I'll start down here. Darcy, do you have any thoughts and reflections on this guidance that you all have put out, and why it's important and how that will be helpful in your future, because you're relatively new to the commission. So this will be really helpful for you going down the road, I would like to think.
Yes, no, I agree with everything Commissioner Tawny said. This was one of my first endeavors with the Bosser Group. Even though I'm not officially representing California, I did work on helping to review and develop the principles. And I think across the West, commissioners, signed off on this from all over the West. So, and this is foundational. I know that there's a lot of information that's come out in the last week from CAISO regarding EDAM that we're all still digesting, and we've made a lot of progress there. We're still working on issues, but I think the one thing that we really do agree on is these organizational principles from a regulator's perspective. There was a lot of positive feedback. The engagement, I think, helped build trust and relationships across the West that are going to help us get through some of the other more substantive issues, because I think we all see that ultimately meeting those goals of reliability, affordability, and meeting our energy policies, including clean energy goals, is really what we're all looking for in the end, and to do it in a way that meets our customers' needs as effectively as possible.
Thanks for that. Thad, any thoughts? I recognizing that timing and process was challenging, but as I understand it, Utah was definitely at the table in engagement on this. Any thoughts on, or any perspective you want to share?
Sure. Well, I'll just briefly say in a public forum that the fact that my signature is not on that document reflects solely a wonky issue in Utah's Administrative Procedures Act that nobody needs to hear about. So I appreciate the chance I had to collaborate with Commissioner Tawny and others who are working on this, reaching out to everyone. It's a forward-looking document that attempts to establish some vision for what regulators are seeing and what we hope continues to develop and what our role should be going forward. So I really appreciate all the collaboration and effort that went into this. It raises one issue that I think is going to continue to be crucial. It's the role of state regulators as things continue to evolve and develop. And to me, there's a balance between how much authority you give to a committee of states, whether it's the Bosser, whether it's the new committee that's being organized with the WPP or anything else. How much authority you give to those committees, and how that ultimately could impact the state and federal jurisdictional lines with how much authority and jurisdiction is remaining with individual state commissions and their regulatory proceedings. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges we're going to have to grapple with as we move beyond the current structures. I don't think that really becomes an issue with the EDAM, but it's something that this governance document raised, and it's something that we're going to have to openly and honestly get our heads around and make some substantive decisions about as things move past that.
Right. Anne, do you want to, any thoughts on it, or deeper dive into any aspect of the principles?
So I want to thank Commissioner Tawny for her leadership on these issues and really working with folks in the West, both on the Western Resource Adequacy Program governance principles and then into these broader governance principles. We don't just talk amongst ourselves in the West. We talk to our colleagues across the country who are currently engaged and have been engaged in more organized markets for years. And so we understand the important principles that come from the FERC orders, as well as how it is appearing in practice in other organizations. And so that's informed what we're doing and what we're thinking about. But I think, too, the importance of how we have learned to work with one another in the West and be able to just reach out to various commissioners or state energy office officials or governor's office officials and talk about the importance of these things, raise people's awareness of why governance principles and why a role for state representatives, whether it is a commissioner or a state energy office representative or a governor's office representative, to engage in these issues. Because if we're not engaged, if we're not a part of the process, there's a lack of transparency in the decision-making that's going on by those engaged in the market. We need to understand what those conversations are, how those might impact the customer benefit, how that might impact how things work, and what might be brought back to the commissions for decision by the utilities. So we need to be engaged, and these principles identify those important critical areas of transparency and engagement and benefit to customers, and the role of the states in having a part of that process. So we're not just sidelined. And because we care, we all care about these issues, we need to bring them back to our states, and we need to be able to explain to our colleagues and to customers and legislators what's going on. And so it's important to be engaged in that process.
Thanks, Anne. And Letha, I know that you worked very hard on those principles. Do you have a favorite principle or one or two that you would like to shout out as a reminder? And I'm not sure exactly where to find them. Would they be on the Weeb website?
This is the challenge of an ad hoc process. We don't have a website for ad hoc processes, except that we sort of do because we lean into Weeb. So I have to say my favorite principle, and the more I work with all of you and with my colleagues in all the states across the West, is the idea of a board that decision making's vested in a board that makes policy-based decisions with a public interest at heart. I think in the West, all of our customers are so differently situated. We have such a challenge in our variety that I think at the end of the day, to get a functional institution, that is critical. You can find them buried in the spring 2022 CREPC agenda, but which is not how you would do advocacy if you were doing advocacy. But I will say, I think that as we continue to evolve towards a full-grown Western States Committee, these sorts of principles become the sort of thing you find on that website. And my hope is the CREPC, which is a partnership between commissioners and energy offices under NARUC and the Western Interstate Energy Board, is working on an evolution towards becoming more active, a little bit more structured, so that we can not be quite so ad hoc about these activities. And my hope is that the principles and the work that we've been doing in this ad hoc manner finds a home in that evolution of CREPC, and that the region knows where to come when you want to find out or engage with the states. And that's Maury Galbraith and his team at Weeb and their partnership with us under CREPC.
So we just have a few minutes left, and so I wanted to give you all the opportunity to talk about whatever you want to talk about. What does the world need to know from, or at least this room need to know, from where you're sitting as we are moving towards EDAM? Fingers crossed that the governance piece will be done by the end of this year with approval next year. I think we're on a good track. But there's a lot going on. Any concluding comments and reflections you all want to share?
Sure.
Okay.
So from the very beginning of my engagement and leadership on the BOSSR, governance matters. You can talk about all of the different market design principles, but if you don't have governance right, and you're not including all the right people, and you're not giving them an appropriate seat at the table, you're not going to get the buy-in that you need from all of the entities that are necessary to put markets together. So sometimes governance has been an afterthought. I think in the most recent engagements, it's not, and I think that's really critical. While sometimes states and state commissioners can't come out and advocate for things the way an interested party might in these proceedings, please consult with the states. Please reach out to those of us on the BOSSR or the CAISO or whatever the next OSSR is going to be. Make sure that we understand your issues. We are trying to understand the interests of all of those engaged in this to make sure that whatever this regional organization is that goes forward, or many that go forward, that we're all engaged and we all have a role. Because if some folks are really taking charge and others are not involved, then I fear that customers are not going to get the same benefit. And so it's all about the benefit to your customers. It's all about making sure we keep the grid up and running and reliable in the most efficient way. And so let's focus on those core principles, bring everybody into the fold, and don't count out the states.
Thanks, Ann. A message that I send every chance I get, and don't blindside the commission, ever. And sometimes clients don't listen to that, much to their chagrin. Sometimes it's really fun to be right. Concluding thoughts, Darcy?
I think that there's a really good foundation that's been built over the last several years and really strong leadership across the West. We've had Commissioner Rechtschaffen on the board. We've had former Commissioner Florio who's here. And so I think California is well represented. We've got a lot of decisions to make ahead of us. There's a lot of issues that still need to be worked through. I think we have a good group of strong leaders that are at the table to try and work through those processes, and they're there with really good intentions, and I believe everybody's working really hard, and we've got a good foundation to move forward. We need to look at how we're going to be able to meet our clean energy goals, our reliability and affordability issues with the changes we're seeing in extreme weather events. And we've got a lot of opportunities and a lot of challenges in front of us. And I think we've got a great set of people all across the board that are ready to meet those challenges and opportunities. And I look forward to participating in that with my fellow commissioners at the California Public Utilities Commission.
Great, thank you. Thad?
Sure. Well, as I think about, very briefly, I know we're out of time, as I think about what I've learned in 10 years as a commissioner and 20 years working in Utah state government, those years don't qualify me to say much, but they have taught me some appreciation for what government is good at and what government is not good at. And my philosophy is government is not necessarily good at trying to take the lead in creating value and benefits, but we can be very good at enabling industry players to do that. And I think this is an example of that. The bottom line is Utah's electricity customers are paying less for their electricity because of the WEIM. Our power costs are lower. We're saving significant amounts of money in fuel costs because of this. And I'm just glad that regulators across the West have found a way to collaborate in a way that has enabled this progress, that we haven't been the roadblock standing in the way, but we're making some contribution and allowing this economic benefit and also benefit in a lot of other areas to continue moving forward. So I'm encouraged by what's happening, and I'm encouraged for what's ahead.
Great, that's awesome. And Letha, final words.
Well, I'd emphasize that, like we heard the CEO panel this morning, none of us is going to be able to adapt to a changing climate, manage through electrification, and manage to take advantage of the low-cost renewables alone. Oregon can't do it alone. California can't do it alone. None of us in the West can do this on our own. And that means that all of the hard work we've been doing sets a foundation for what we have to do next. And I am impatient for those customer benefits to come home. We have an extraordinarily energy burdened customer group in Oregon, and those benefits need to come home to them while we're going through this transition. And so I'm really excited to see EDAM move forward. It's been a real privilege to sit on the GRC and learn so much about the West, to hear from colleagues across the West what their concerns are, and to try to find a balanced governance approach. And we're going to have to roll up our sleeves and take that on in spades to get the next tranche of benefits into customer bills and adapt to a changing climate. And the urgency just couldn't be higher. It's obvious, and we talked about it already this morning. So I'm really excited to collaborate further and deepen the partnerships across the West, because none of us can do this alone, and only a balanced, inclusive approach is going to actually protect customers at the end of the day.
Great. Thank you. Thank you all. I love spending time with you. I learned so much, and it's just great camaraderie that I feel like I can still be in the club, even though I've long since left my regulatory days behind. Let's go ahead and give our commissioners a round of applause, and thank you.